Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Frankly Speaking, and joining me today is author and historian Vikram Sampath. Vikram Sampath, you're on a roll, rediscovering India's real history. First Savarkar and now this book on Bravehearts of Bharat. I was reading your book and you describe tribute to 15 civilizational heroes and heroines as you describe them, and give them the credit that history really hasn't given them. The thought of this book, you also mentioned, came up in a chat that you had with Sanjeev Sanyal, who, apart from being an economist, is quite a historian himself. Do historians get along, and do they share ideas for books?
Thank you, Navika, and it's always such a pleasure to be on your show. It just felt like yesterday when I was talking to you about my previous book, Savarkar: A Contested Legacy, and thank you for inviting me again for this book. There's a tagline from a very famous brand in my city, Bangalore, which says, "A lot can happen over coffee." So similarly, a lot can happen over coffee when, as you said, two historians who are also friends meet. So Sanjeev and I have had lots of discussions and conversations, and during this particular conversation, he just brought it up very casually that, have you noticed the fact that all the battles and wars that we study about in our history books or in popular history, it's always like a long laundry list, a litany of wars where India and Indians have lost. Right from the Arab invasion of Sindh to the Battle of Tarain to the battles of Panipat, the Anglo-Mysore, Anglo-Maratha, Anglo-Sikh wars, Battle of Plassey, Battle of Buxar, you name it, and it's like a long litany of invaders who kept coming: the Arabs, the Turks, the Mongols, the Portuguese, the French, the British, the Dutch, all of them, and we just kept covering in front of invaders. And we discussed the possibility that if we are still around as a civilization, we are around and kicking while most of our contemporary civilizations have gone away, there must have been some battles that we won also. There must have been some resistance that we as a civilization put. So where are those stories of victory? Where are those stories of courage? And we literally scratched our heads to list about 10 such battles or heroes where India has won or Indians have won battles. And it was quite a tough task for us to do, and that is where the idea of this book germinated in me. And I thank Sanjeev for literally seeding this idea in my head that there is this need to look back as to how we as a civilization have fought back and put up resistance. Because mind you, it took even the Islamic conquest and the Islamic kingdom to be established in India. It took 500 years after the first invasion of Sindh by the Arabs. The Delhi Sultanate and the slave dynasty was established only 500 years later in 1206. So till then, there were so many battles of courage that we put, where we pushed back invaders. And even after that, till the time of the British and after that too, different pockets of India faced resistance, faced courage, faced valor, and we have somehow, in the larger colonial narrative that has been passed down to us by our colonial masters, and then of course after independence by the ideological tilt that Indian historiography sees, we have just somewhere forgotten these in this larger narrative that we need to be presented as a nation of losers. Right from the myth of the Aryan invasion theory down to the British, we were just destined to be ruled by outsiders. We have not been a brave civilization. We've been given to the karma theory. Our philosophy has made us animals.
And a
all
divided
this has been
Bharat
into our heads, and a divided Bharat indeed. All of this adding to that larger picture of we have covered in front of invasions, which is historically untrue, and that is what this book, Bravehearts of Bharat, attempts to do through 15 civilizational heroes and heroines, as you mentioned. Of course, it was a very tough choice to make as to who these 15 people would be, who is left behind, who is chosen. But I think, as I mentioned even in my prologue, that I hope this book spurs many more such books by other people, other scholars and historians who bring out these stories of unsung heroes and heroines, because that, I think, is the need of the hour.
Well, Vikram, you do talk about 15 great personalities, 8 men and 7 women, and going right up to the Northeast to discover some of our history and great leaders from the Northeast. Yeah. I want to ask you, was it deliberate that our school curriculum, our colleges do not teach this in their syllabus, which is why we don't know about these heroes or, you know, the great women who have really stood up to foreign powers? Or and did you have to dig really deep to bring out these stories, or were these stories out there and nobody was bothering to put them in because these were victories, civilizational victories, which have made us survive till this day?
That's true, Navika. I mean, the stories were there. It was there in folklore. It was there in oral narratives, in regional literature. But somehow, what is the larger, mainstream history of India somehow ignored them. And like you rightly mentioned, the Northeast seldom features in how many of us even know what Northeastern kingdoms and peoples are part of this rubric of the history of India. The Ahoms who ruled for 600 years, or the Twipras, the Meiteis of Manipur, the people of Nagaland, and so on. And likewise, even the south of India, the Rashtrakutas, the Chalukyas, Pallavas, the mighty Cholas, the Vijayanagar Empire, the Shatavahanas, the Wadeyars of Mysore, the rulers of Travancore. They make fleeting, mentions of all of these in particularly the textbooks of history. In fact, I would urge you and your viewers to go to the NCERT website, and they have all the history books online. If you download that and look at them, stories of the past or something it's called, the Cholas probably get half a paragraph in that book. The Shatavahanas, Pallavas and Chalukyas are just mentioned in some map there, that this is where they ruled, etc. The Marathas, the mighty Marathas, from whom the British eventually took India, conquered India from, they hardly get a mention there. The Vijayanagar Empire gets a few lines. Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, the ultimate bulwark and the establisher of this, the Maratha Samrajya, is just given a photograph, and there's a caption under his name, which is all that a young child of India would know about Chhatrapati Shivaji. So that is the anomaly of our history textbooks. And on the contrary, you have 3 chapters on the Mughal Empire and several chapters and details about the Delhi Sultanate, the Lodhis, the Tughlaqs and Khiljis. Other than being invaders, I don't really know what their contribution to the civilizational heritage of this country is. So why do we need to learn by rote in succession the lines of everybody who was part of the Tughlaq dynasty or so on, whereas we don't probably, a child cannot list the Chola dynasty succession or someone from the Ahoms. So I think this disparity that exists is a very deliberate one that's been made. The eccentricity of our history, and I think Bharat needs to snatch back its history, its narrative back from Delhi, because when we say history of India, history of Bharat, it is not just the history of Delhi. There are vast swathes of land which don't get captured or featured in the manner that it should and for the importance that it deserves.
Well, Vikram Sampath, you did talk about the Tughlaqs, the Lodhis, the Khiljis, the Kutubuddin Aibaks. Of course, we've read about all of them, and the Delhi Sultanate. The question I want to ask, and I want to go between the past and the present throughout this interview, because the past continues to haunt us even today, and there are many present-day contextual controversies or debates that are currently on. I want to ask you, that emphasis on the Delhi Sultanate and everything revolving around Delhi definitely was part of our, historical evidence and chronicles that we've read. But do you think Delhi, even today, occupies that same position? Because everything actually emanates out of Delhi even now.
Yeah, that's true, Navika. And I think being the the political capital of India and the national capital, the place where all the buzz and activity is, it normally gets more than its fair share of due, whereas large parts, the tyranny of distance that we talk of, floods in Assam or something that happens down south, these don't get featured even in the media. So the Lutyens that we talk of, I think it's a state of mind of being this small group, which is what we think is Bharat all about, whereas a country which is as vast as ours, which spans such a vast diversity and so many peoples and places. Delhi is important. I have nothing against it. I love the city. But India is not just Delhi. So I think whether it's historical narrative, whether it's our media narratives, as to what stories get attention in the media. My hometown Bangalore is in the news, in national news only when there's a flood here, or it's only for the wrong reasons. But for the success stories, or even day-to-day activities, politics, etc., that happens in this part of the country is probably never covered with as much vigor and enthusiasm as what happens in Delhi, a JNU university, and these become the narrative of India, whereas it's just one small little part of the country, such a vast country.
Do you think there are linguistic barriers that make that happen? And I want to ask you, in the context of language, you've covered personalities from different parts of India in your book, and you talk of Chand Bibi, for instance, who spoke Persian, Dakhni, Arabic, Telugu and Kannada. There is a debate that is raging about Hindi and the imposition of Hindi. How do you see this evolving? Do you believe there is a bid to impose any one language as a national language, or do you think this is just one of those debates that comes and goes?
Well, as someone who comes from the south of India, I do feel quite strongly about that, Navika, that, while I'm very proficient in Hindi, I studied Hindi up to class 12 out of choice, though I had a choice to pick up some other language, and it's not my mother tongue, but I'm conversant in the language. But there is a feeling in different parts of India, whether it's southern India, whether it's Bengal, whether it's eastern India, northeast, and so on, where this is not their first language of comfort. It's not the language of convenience. A lot of them feel more comfortable in English, and I think with that wisdom in mind, both English and Hindi were made the official kind of link language. And each of the states which have been formed on linguistic basis post-independence, those languages are important. So this clamor that we hear from several Hindi speakers that Hindi is the national language is false, because we don't have a national language. We have 22 official languages, each of which is as important as the other. But at the same time, it's a great link language which can link people together. But at the same time, it should not be imposed with any sense of chauvinism. There are a lot of people who come to parts of southern India. Bangalore, for instance, has lots of people who come from different parts of the country. They would expect a local shopkeeper or a house help to talk to you in Hindi, but you will not make an attempt to learn Kannada after staying here for 20-25 years. Kannada gottilla, that is the only thing that they will learn in all those decades. And also flaunt as a great badge of honor. You go to France, you'll have to learn French to survive there. So I think there's this give and take that needs to be done between languages, not harden positions. If you're going, more the languages the better it is. You can connect to more people. You get to know the richness of India, its diversity, local stories, much more in a better way. And like you said, these heroes of the past, they knew multiple languages. Velu Nachiyar, an 18th century queen whom I cover in my book, she knew Urdu. She could speak fluent Urdu with Hyder Ali of Mysore. She also went to France at the peak of the French Revolution. She knew to speak French. She'd learned English. So you can connect to a number of people. So I think it's a false debate which all the time, keeps getting imposed. That we should not learn a language. We should certainly learn as many Indian languages. But this false chauvinism that mine is more superior, or there is one national language and you all need to learn that only because a majority of Indians speak that, I think that leads to a lot of backlash, particularly from various parts of India, the south and the east, as I mentioned.
Vikram, I want to ask you, you talked about a few examples, and every time you talk about the country's history, you talk about it as India. Why then is the title of your book Bravehearts of Bharat? Is there a message in the use of the word Bharat? Because Bharat normally Hindi में use होता है. आप Bravehearts of Bharat कह रहे हैं. Is there a message there?
There is a subtle message. Bharat is the civilizational identity of India. I think right from the Vishnu Purana, where Uttaram yat samudrasya himadraschaiva dakshinam varshatad bharatam nama bharati yatra santati. This landmass between the the mountains and the oceans, that is called Bharat. The Varsha is called Bharata, and its santati or children are Bharatiyas, is how our ancestors have seen this land. I have nothing against the word India. I think a lot of people are very militantly against it, saying we must use only Bharat. These are synonyms, but when we're talking civilizationally about our nation, Bharat seems to be much richer. It has a lot of history behind it, a lot of context, a lot of subtlety to it, and that's why I chose that term rather than India.
Well, Vikram,
the subtitle though is vignettes from Indian history. So India, that is Bharat, as our constitution also says. I think we shouldn't create this false battle between India and Bharat.
I don't know. I have this copy. I don't see the subtext in this unless the final print have. I have the earlier print without the cover, and it just says Bravehearts of Bharat. I mean, I don't have any problem with that, because Bharat is Indianness. Bharatiyata and Indianness, they all go together. But I just wanted to understand the author's message in this. Vikram Sampath, I also want to ask you, you chronicle the achievements of the Chola dynasty. Also because there is a recent film that has come on this particular part of our history, Ponniyin Selvan 1, that has recently been released. You also talk about the contributions, including building of great temples by this dynasty around Tanjavur, in and around Tanjavur, and their contributions to that kind of deep rooting of the Hindu religion. But at the same time, Kamal Haasan, somebody who's well known and in politics and as an actor, he said that Hinduism did not even exist then. What do you make of a comment like that?
Well, I think it's a bogus controversy, which I think should have just been ignored. It was not worth the discussion at all, because to say that the Cholas were not Hindus, I mean, Hinduism is a vast, ocean. The Sanatana Dharma, as it was always called, had different streams. And the main streams, the Shaiva, the Vaishnava, the Shaura, the Surya related, the Shakta, Vainayaka, Kaumaram of Ganesha and Kartikeya. If you see the Chola history all through, they've appeased all these different branches. Of course, they were primarily Shiva Bhaktas belonging to the Shaivite tradition, but they considered Vishnu or Tiruman, as they called them, as the originator of their family. And later on also called themselves Suryavanshis, belonging to the Surya clan. They claimed Lord Rama is one of their ancestors. Nishumba Sudini, a form of Durga, was their family deity, a family goddess. So the Shakta tradition was also there. They built numerous temples for Muruga, Kartikeya in southern India. The motifs of Ganpati are very much rife in Chola temples, Chola art, architecture, all of that. So, and Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola, they gave equal emphasis to both Tamil as well as Sanskrit, verses. Wages were given to people who chanted verses in both these languages, and they've left behind a huge corpus of material in inscriptions, in coins, in palm leaf manuscripts, and we see all these things there, that they performed yajnas, they gave danas. All of these are part of the Hindu tradition. So I think to say that they were not Hindu, I think my good friend who's on your channel several times, Anand Ranganathan, very correctly pointed out that before oxygen was invented, what were we breathing? You say everything happens only after the Englishman comes and names us. Tamil Nadu, that way, is a term that came only in the 1969, 1970. But was there no Tamil land before that? There was a Tamil culture. So whatever be the name, that they all belonged to these different panthas, matas within the Sanatan Dharma, makes it immaterial whether you call them Hindu or whatever, but they belong to the same tradition that today is popularly called as Hinduism. That way, Jesus Christ, if you ask him, are you a Christian? He'll probably say, I don't understand what you're talking about. So that way, going on name splitting, hair splitting on names, I think is a little puerile, and as I said, it should have just been dismissed with the contempt that it deserved.
Well, Vikram Sampath, I also want to ask you, many people say that there is a cultural renaissance that we are seeing in our country. When the Prime Minister takes special interest, whether it is the Kashi Vishwanath corridor, whether it is the Mahakal corridor, he goes to Kedarnath, Badrinath, brings back the grandeur of the religion that we have followed and the civilization that we have followed. Do you see this as a symbol of cultural renaissance, or is this a religious renaissance? And does it really, have anything to do with the questions that are raised about the head of the state being part of a secular government and who should not be seen as participating in some of these rituals? How do you respond to the debate on this?
Well, for one, Navika, I think this government and the Prime Minister, it's not just Hindu temples or Hindu shrines. There's been a Buddhist circuit that was done, a lot of tours around centers of Bhagwan Buddha's, places that were associated with him, the Sikh faith, Kartarpur Sahib corridor, and all of that was done around that religion. So, I mean, these are faiths, Indic faiths, that have originated from this land. If they are not celebrated and exalted in this land, where else will they be? They will not be done in the OIC nations. So, I don't see anything wrong in the fact that you can be the head of the government, but at the same time, you also participate in events which highlight the civilizational glory of this country. And religious tourism, spiritual tourism is something that India can gain immensely from, and not only keep aside the economics and the monetary value of it. I think that sense of pride, that sense of civilizational renaissance about what we are after centuries of colonization, of slavery, the kind of amnesia that we've had about our own past, about our achievements, the sense of apologia that we feel about our achievements. We've been made to belittle them and all the time talk only about the defects and problems that we've had. In the wake of all that, I think it's extremely important that the leader of the country also arouses these sentiments in the common people of India, and I see absolutely nothing wrong in that.
Well, Vikram, I read your book and you talk about Rani Naiki Devi of Gujarat and how she was able to keep Muhammad Ghori at bay and prevent him from invading Gujarat, something his predecessor Ghazni had done and had even destroyed the Somnath temple. Now, this truly is a gem that you have unearthed, because our textbooks have never taught us about Rani Naiki Devi of Gujarat.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that a lady with an infant child, Mooldeva II, whom she had as her, whose regent she was, keeping her in her lap. She had the Battle of Kasarhada in 1178, where Ghori was destroyed so badly that he was so embarrassed to be destroyed, to be vanquished by a woman. He had thought Gujarat was a low-hanging fruit. There was a lady who was the regent queen, and it could be overrun very easily. But he was in for a big shock, and so he never ever turned back to Gujarat. Several decades later, it was his slave Aibak who took the revenge and managed to annex Gujarat towards about 30 years later. But even contemporary, records, Navika, I was quite surprised that the Jain accounts, the Sanskrit accounts of that time, they hardly mention Naiki Devi, Meru Tunga, who talks about her. I mean, that's also very condescending, saying that the Muslim ruler was so weak that even a woman could vanquish him. So not complimenting the lady for her courage or for her strategy, but saying that the opponent was so weak that even a lady could vanquish him. That is how disparagingly she's been, mentioned in even our own contemporary records. So it's a very, very sad commentary. And I think in this book, I've also tried to balance that equation, that where were all these women warriors? And if you see across the book, Navika, everybody, whether it was Naiki Devi, there was this Rudramma Devi of Warangal, all of these people, and later Ahilya Holkar, several centuries later, they were given education by their fathers. They were given training in military warfare, horse riding, all of that, Velu Nachiyar as well, fencing and all kinds of military pursuits. Contrary to the belief that in Bharat, women are all the time subjugated and so on, these were the brave women whose fathers and father-in-laws and others, they actually encouraged them to also participate in scholarly activities or even, in warfare. So Naiki Devi was one. She was a Goa Kadamba princess who was married into the Chalukya Solanki family of Gujarat and scripted history, which kind of changed the very course of Indian history, because had Ghori occupied Gujarat, the whole of Rajputana and southern Gujarat, that entire region would have fallen to him, and the history of India would have taken a different turn. So I think these warriors are what I'm talking about when I say, they've been unsung totally. And this book is just an attempt to bring those names into circulation at least. We may not know a whole lot about Naiki Devi's details, but at least we know the general, framework of her life and her main achievements. I think that would be a big task achieved indeed.
Well, clearly, whether these stories will make it to our curriculum is the biggest challenge, because right now, as they say, gumnaam hastiyan thi ye. Nobody knows their names and nobody knows their achievements. And while Rani Jhansi is well remembered, you spoke about Rudramma Devi of Warangal, who had a special place in history. She also led her forces into battle at a time when it was considered rare for women to be at the forefront of a military campaign. Tell us more about Rudramma Devi of Warangal.
Yeah, Rudramma is again a fascinating woman whose father Ganpati Deva, he had, of the Kakatiya dynasty of Warangal, he had no sons, and so he groomed his daughter to be his successor, and quite ironically hid the gender of this girl from his nobles and ministers and so on. It was a secret pact. Only he and his minister and others knew that he had a girl. So it was always told, till of course she attained puberty, that she was a boy and she was being trained outside in military warfare. And much later she emerged as his successor, and that led to a lot of heartburn among the family itself and also with the neighboring kingdoms, who saw the Kakatiya dynasty now as a lame duck kingdom which could be easily conquered. But Rudramma never, gave up, and she constantly fought battles all through her life to get rid of these elements who were out to sabotage her, largely from within the kingdom, within the family. She started the Nayan Karamu system of, tributaries who were loyal to her, and that later led under the Vijayanagar Empire to the Nayaka system, which became very entrenched in different parts of southern India. And she was killed in battle, most probably. We don't know the actual causes of her death. She was killed in battle when she was 80 years old, and she was leading a battle against a usurper who was even till then trying to ensure that a woman was not at the helm. So I think what a courageous life, and what a pity that we know so little about people like this.
80-year-old still, going in for a battle. And we only remember Khoob Ladi Mardani, wo to Jhansi wali Rani thi. and not much about Rudrama Devi. Well, sad story of the way history has been presented to us. I also want to ask you, when talking about the achievement of Rana Kumbha and his invasion of Nagaur, you write, this was perhaps one of the rarest cases when a Hindu monarch adopted the same policy as Muslim conquerors or rulers and demolished the latter's place of worship, the mosque, quite like how countless temples had been desecrated. My question is, how do we look back at these deeds? Because even in the present context, many people raise the same question that, you know, reopening these old wounds can yield nothing, and wounds can be opened by many people following different faiths.
Well, that is true. I mean, reopening wounds, would we call it that, or acknowledging the excesses of the past is a great way to heal those wounds. Whitewashing them and behaving as if these things never happened at all, and in its place create a fanciful and exaggerated history, I think that is very, very detrimental to society. I time and again hold that, you know, the grand edifice that we think of national unity, social cohesion, you know, amity between communities, all this cannot rest on the shaky foundations of fabricated history. We need to look our history into the eye, make peace with it, have that truth and reconciliation with our past, and move on. These are not revenge stories. These do not call for retribution. These do not always call for, you can't undo the wrongs of the past. These have already happened. But at the same time, you acknowledge that these things happened rather than whitewash it and wish them away, which you cannot do. So outside, when you have Holocaust museums which commemorate, the horrors of the Holocaust, nobody is saying, it's a symbol of hatred against anybody. It's just a reminder of what happened in the past, and history is also an important tool to ensure that these mistakes of the past are never repeated again. That is also a very important tool or utility of history, that we learn from these mistakes and ensure that they don't happen again. So I think that needs to be the healing role of history. Subterfuge and whitewash cannot achieve this, and we'll constantly keep having upheavals, these ghosts from the past, which will keep coming from under the carpet when we try to push them under. That is the sad, irony of Indian historiography, and that's why we face these problems.
So while I agree that closure is important and revisiting history in its correct context may give closure, but when you write about Ahilyabai Holkar and what she did for the civilizational heritage, including protecting the Shivlinga at Gyanvapi, it does bring me to the present question, because there is a court case which is now hearing whether or not the Places of Worship Act of 1991 should stay, whether or not the rightful Shivlinga, as that structure is now being called. Of course, the other side calls it a fountain. People want to reclaim it and build a temple back. On the one hand, you are saying that retribution should not be there, but wouldn't this be seen as retribution by those who will lose their place of worship?
That's a completely different conversation, Navika. But I do understand that I think in the context of some of these heroes in this book, like Ahilyabai Holkar, it becomes important that there are certain places which are extremely important civilizationally for this nation, and places like Ayodhya, Mathura, Kashi, these do come under them, under that definition. Even Ahilyabai, I think, chose the places that she would like to contribute to. She chose the 12 Jyotirlingas, the 7 Puris, the 4 Dhams, and ensured that whatever was destroyed by the waves of iconoclasm before her, she re-established temples in those places, and thereby culturally and spiritually kind of unified Bharat. So to that extent, there are as historian Sitaram Goyal says, there are almost 40,000 temples that got destroyed in the 500 years of, the Delhi Sultanate alone. It's very difficult to start going on a reclamation drive to get all these 40,000 temples back. But there are some places which are extremely important, and as I said, civilizational markers like these. And so if there are movements, legitimate movements, through peaceful ways, through legal procedures, no one is going and violently taking back anything from anybody. If through the legal course of action one gets back and corrects our history, corrects these problems of the past, I don't see anything wrong in that. That I do not think is part of the larger retribution. If one actually went on a drive saying all those shrines which were destroyed of every faith, then we don't know where to end. There'll be lots of commotion and social disharmony. So I think we need to pick and choose what's important, and I think that's been the larger drive to that. We want only these three, Kashi, Mathura and Ayodhya, already being back. So I think that's where the story should end.
You can't be different in at once. So we present the Faber 6-way chimney with 6-way suction and auto clean.
Faber 6-way chimney. It is a fix for 6.
I also want to ask you, I'm fascinated by Rani Abakka Chauta of Ullal. She fought the Portuguese. You speak about Bhuta Aradhane rituals in coastal Karnataka that are meant to be a homage to her. Have you seen the latest Kannada film Kantara, which is making waves across the country? Even that shows some of these rituals. So do you think some of these allusions to our past history, though not well traversed, do exist in some rituals that we follow?
Yeah, true. And unfortunately, Navika, there's a controversy around that too. At least in my state, it's a controversy that's doing the rounds all the time, where they say even the Bhuta Radhane that is done is not Hinduism. So, what is Hinduism? The Cholas are not Hindus, the Bhuta rituals are not Hindus, are not Hindu rituals. Onam was not Hindu. Then we were told that the Dandiya during Garba is not Hindu. So I really don't know what is left of being Hindu. I think it's a larger agenda that we saw that very dubious conference a year back, dismantling global Hindutva, where people with very, very nefarious credentials got together in that conclave masquerading as an academic scholastic get-together, where, if you remember, at the end of it, all through they were saying that Hinduism and Hindutva is different, we need to dismantle Hindutva, but by the end conference they veered down to this view that Hindutva can be dismantled only if Hinduism is dismantled. So I think there's this larger attempt to dehumanize, delegitimize and strip away everything from Hinduism. Like I mentioned earlier, the Sanatan Dharma has been extremely embracive, whether it's animism, shamanic rituals, the Vedic forms, the tantric forms, which are completely at tangent with how the Vedic rituals are followed. All of them are part of the same fold which we would call Hindu or Sanatan Dharma. Even atheism or Nirishwarvad is also part of that same embracive fold. So to strip away parts of it and say this is not Hindu, that is not Hindu, then what exactly is the core which is left behind to call as Hindu? So I think this is a very, very calculated kind of a misinformation campaign that's going on globally to belittle Hinduism and, as I said, delegitimize it. So the Bhuta Aradhane rituals also fall under that same thing. I mean, along with ancestor worship, it's also characters of the past, like Rani Abbakka, as I mentioned in the book, is invoked by the practitioners very, very regularly. And so are other kings and queens and so on of the past, whom locals connect with. So while mainstream history may have forgotten these characters, they are still very, very popularly alive among the local population through exactly these rituals and traditions, which are still very, very vibrant and alive as a part of day-to-day, living and livelihood for these people. And to call them names or to tell that this does not belong to a particular group, I think that does a lot of harm to them. And all those Johnnies who talk about appropriation, that Hinduism is this behemoth which is appropriating all these Adivasi, the Mool Nivasi rituals. I mean, how often have they come out and actually spoken of the fact that in large parts of India, whether it's the tribal belts of Chhattisgarh or Odisha or the Northeast and so on, where the missionary activities have converted so many of these tribal communities, they have lost everything about their, pagan past. They have lost their cultures, their dialects, languages and so on. English becomes the language in so many parts of the Northeast, where their indigenous languages have almost disappeared slowly. So why don't anybody talk about that? But one film which is successful, there this false controversy is created that this is not Hinduism and Hinduism is appropriating it and so on. So I think this is part of that larger,
liberal
international
agenda
campaign that I pointed towards to discredit us globally. I don't find anything liberal about them, Navika.
Yeah, but it is called liberal. Let me also compliment you when you bring up the stories of Lachit Barphukan of Assam, who defeated the armies of Aurangzeb, including the Battle of Sarai Ghat in the 17th century. Not much is known about this. In fact, nothing is known कि औरंगजेब को भी किसी ने हराया था, वो भी आसाम में. And then you talk about Kashmir, where the Chinese were defeated by Lalitaditya Muktapida of Kashmir, who built the Martan temple. These stories and the fact that Kashmir, what it is today, and the history of Kashmir and the Martan temple, deliberately not taught to various tracts of Indians across Bharat?
True. I mean, Lalitaditya was called a world conqueror. Of course, Kalhana in his Rajatarangini went on a hyperbole and also painted this large picture that, Lalitaditya had almost conquered the whole of India, which may have been a little bit of an overkill and a stretch of imagination. But it was certainly true that he had a vast empire, and Kashmir was politically a very important epicenter of India in 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th centuries, and what was important, Navika, was in the Indic imagination, it is not just political conquest, building huge palaces and, temples, which were important, but at the same time, the part of this Digvijaya campaigns that these people went on was also to make their cities, their capitals, centers of learning and centers of philosophy, scholastic progress, and that is how the overall index of a particular kingdom was measured, saying not only the riches, not only the magnificent structures, but intellectually how sound are you? So Lalitaditya ensured he also laid the foundations of that very philosophical and spiritual importance for Kashmir in our nation's imagination, which we seldom know or talk about. I mean, everywhere he went and conquered, someone in Yashovarman of Kanauj, he would bring back the scholars who were in those places, Vakpati and Bhavabhuti and Atri Gupta and so many others. And Atri Gupta was the grandfather of Abhinav Gupta, who laid the foundations of the Kashmir Shaivism school. So Tantric schools, the Shiva Sutras, the Vijnan Bhairava Tantra, all of that started getting written in Kashmir. Ayurveda specialists, whether it was Charvak or Sushruta and others, they were also given shelter there, and it became a major center of that also. Jyotisha or astrology, astronomy, all of these also were important elements of the Kashmir way of life, and no doubt when Adi Shankara established his Sarvagnya Peeth, all-knowing Peeth. It was in Kashmir and dedicated to goddess Sharda, and the script there too was called Sharda. So these stories of, when we talk of Kashmir, we only look at the contemporary history of Kashmir and its population, but what about the Hindu past of Kashmir? What about the importance of that to our civilization and our nation? And why have those stories been obliterated from our memories? And Lachit Borphukan, like you mentioned, in the 17th century, he ensured that within a matter of 10 years, 12 years, the Mughals who had occupied a great part of western Assam were completely driven away. Mir Jumla had initially conquered western Assam, but later on Aurangzeb sends a huge army under Raja Ram Singh of Jaipur to capture whatever was lost to the Ahoms. But Lachit, who was the military commander of the Ahom king, ensures that they play to their advantage. They were, naval. Absolutely. In the naval command, they were supreme. So they brought the Mughals to, the place of their advantage and the opponent's disadvantage, and ensured that the Battle of Saraighat in 1671 was won, resoundingly, and the Mughals never looked back at this place. Similarly, 20 years ago, before that, Navika, you had the Battle of Kolachal in distant Kerala, where Marthanda Varma ensured that a company like the Dutch East India Company, which had by then entrenched itself as a major, colonizing power, the first company to have been listed in the stock exchanges. Their axis of power extended from South Africa till, Japan and Vietnam and Malaysia and so on, with a large part of India also in their focus of activity, Bengal, Kerala and other places. The Battle of Kolachal, where Marthanda Varma ensured a complete rout of the Dutch, ensured that they collapsed as a global power, and their dreams of colonizing India were also routed completely. In any other country, the Battle of Kolachal and Marthanda Varma statues would perhaps be put up everywhere as proud symbols that we need to commemorate. But other than people in Kerala, I don't know how many in the rest of India even know who Marthanda Varma is, or Rani Abbakka, who, as you said, defeated the Portuguese, or Lachit Borphukan, and all these names. I think, as I said, the time has come when we actually start re-identifying who our heroes and heroines are, and start commemorating and celebrating them and pay our homage and tribute to them.
Well, Vikram, it's really been an eye-opener, but before I let you go, I want to ask you, you've spoken a lot about the heroes. How do you see Tipu Sultan, who's not part of this book, but he fought the British, but also murdered thousands of Nayars in Kerala? How do you see him, a hero or a villain?
Navika, this will be a part of our conversation next time, because my next book, incidentally, is the biography of Tipu Sultan that I'm planning, a full-length book on him. But in short, no one can doubt the fact that he was a brave warrior who, fought the British numerous times. I would actually rate his father, Hyder Ali, as a much greater hero than Tipu, because Tipu got the kingdom on a platter from his father, and he made several strategic mistakes, and he went from disaster to disaster, especially with the British. The Third Anglo-Mysore War, he had to cede half his territory, and of course he was in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. But that doesn't take away, the bravery from him. He was strategically unwise. But the social report card is also important. And there it's not just the Nayars of Malabar, but also the Kodavas in Coorg, the Syrian Christians in Mangalore, the Konkanis, the Mandya Mayangars, in Melukote. We're just in the middle of Deepavali, and 400 of their family, of the Mandya Mayangars, men, women and children, were brutally hanged from trees by Tipu Sultan. And to this day, the Mandya Mayangar community does not celebrate Diwali. They commemorate it as a day of mourning. and their Diwali comes much later. So these are also very important facts of history. So when this perverse, move by the previous government of Karnataka to celebrate Tipu Jayanti was done, lots of people who are not affiliated to the BJP or RSS or anything, common people came out in protest against this. Christian organizations too, in Mangalore, in parts of coastal Karnataka, the Kurgis, they came out in protest. And I was told recently, this Diwali, the Iyengars of Melkote, they actually went on, a march protesting against what happened to their ancestors. So a person's legacy, I think, is besmirched by this combination of political conquest, bravery, valor, also shaded or overshadowed by the social report card, which sadly in the case of Tipu Sultan is not something that one can be proud of. So that's one reason I didn't include him in the as a part of this book. But as I said, that's the next book where I go deep into each of these acts of omission on his part, and also his rightful legacy, his contributions, and so on. And so I think we've already fixed up the details for the next conversation that you and I will have on this subject.
Well, Vikram Sampath, so at least I got your future plans for our viewers, and they can now wait after Bravehearts of Bharat for another book on Tipu Sultan, a history that has created a lot of curiosity, especially as I keep saying that we've been going between, the time warp, history and present day. Many of our present day debates are rooted in the history of India. And thank you very much for bringing to us these unsung heroes who should have got their rightful place in the history of India, who should have been lauded and remembered, but hopefully, thanks to your book, will find place in curriculum so that the future generations can also know about their valor, their stories. Thank you very much, Vikram Sampath, for joining me on Frankly Speaking.
Thank you.